My dog saved my life on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. When Max started growling at my bride during our wedding ceremony, I thought he was just being protective. But what I discovered 3 days later completely shattered everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd just married. This story will make you question whether animals really can sense things we can't. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why I now trust my dog's judgment more than my own heart. I'm Jake, and 6 months ago I thought I had it all figured out. Beautiful fiancée named Sarah, dream wedding planned down to every detail, and Max, my loyal German Shepherd who'd been with me for 8 years through thick and thin. Max had always been the perfect judge of character. He loved everyone I brought home. My friends, my family, even my ex-girlfriends got the Max seal of approval. Everyone except Sarah. And I was about to find out why in the most devastating way possible. But here's what makes this story even more chilling. The signs were there from the very beginning. I just chose to ignore them because I was so blinded by what I thought was love. Stay with me because this gets much darker than you might expect. And there's a twist near the end that even I didn't see coming until it was almost too late. Let me take you back to where it all started, because understanding how Max reacted from day one is crucial to this story. The first time Sarah met Max was on our 3rd date, about 4 months into our relationship. I'd been talking about Max constantly, how he was my best friend, my hiking buddy, basically my family. Sarah seemed charmed by how much I loved my dog, always asking to see pictures and hear stories about our adventures. I was so excited to introduce them. I'd brought her back to my apartment after dinner, practically bouncing with anticipation. "You're going to love him," I kept saying. "And he's going to love you." I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment Sarah walked through my front door, Max's entire demeanor changed in a way I'd never witnessed before. His ears went back flat against his head, his hackles raised like he'd seen a threat, and he let out this low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. It wasn't his normal stranger at the door alert bark. This was something primal, something that made the hair on my own arms stand up. Sarah's reaction was interesting, looking back on it now. She didn't seem surprised or hurt. Instead, she laughed it off with this casual wave of her hand. "Oh, I'm not really a dog person anyway," she said with a smile that I thought was understanding and patient. "He'll warm up to me eventually. They always do." That phrase, "they always do," should have been my first major red flag. It implied she'd dealt with hostile animals before, which seemed odd for someone who claimed not to be a dog person. Over the next few months, as our relationship got more serious, Max's behavior around Sarah only intensified. Every single time she came over, he'd position himself directly between us on the couch. If we were watching a movie and I had my arm around her, Max would squeeze himself into that space, forcing me to choose between comforting my girlfriend or accommodating my dog. When she stayed the night, Max would pace the hallway outside my bedroom, whining and scratching at the door until I'd get up and check on him. My friends started joking about it constantly. "Max is jealous," they'd say. "He doesn't want to share his daddy with anyone." Even my veterinarian, Dr. Martinez, who'd known Max since he was a puppy, suggested that some dogs just take longer to accept new people in their owner's life, especially when that person represents a major change to their routine. But here's what really should have been a massive warning sign, something I'm almost embarrassed to admit I fell for. Sarah started positioning herself as the solution to Max's behavioral problem. She bought books about dog psychology, always leaving them strategically placed where I'd see them. Titles like Establishing Pack Hierarchy and Training Aggressive Dogs. She'd highlight passages about how dogs need to understand their place in the family structure, how allowing a dog to be territorial could lead to more serious behavioral issues down the line. She was so convincing, so logical and scientific about it all. "Jake," she'd say, using this patient, almost therapist-like tone, "Max is a wonderful dog, but he's clearly stressed by our relationship. For his own well-being, we need to establish boundaries. He needs to learn that you're the alpha, not him, and that I'm part of your pack now." She made it sound like she was looking out for Max's best interests, like she genuinely cared about his emotional health. I actually started to believe that maybe Max was the problem. Maybe I'd been too permissive with him over the years. Maybe Sarah's structured approach was exactly what we both needed. I began implementing her suggestions, making Max sleep in his own bed instead of mine when Sarah stayed over, not allowing him on the furniture when she was around, even changing his feeding schedule to establish clearer boundaries. Looking back now, I realized Sarah was systematically isolating me from my closest companion, and she was making me complicit in the process. She was so skilled at it that I never felt manipulated. Instead, I felt like we were working together as a team to solve a problem. The fact that the problem was my dog's accurate assessment of her character never occurred to me. Now, before I tell you about the wedding day disaster that changed everything, I need to share something that happened just 2 weeks before the ceremony. Something so bizarre and unsettling that it still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. Because what Max did that night was like he was desperately trying to show me physical evidence of what was coming. And I completely missed the message he was trying to send. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 14 days before our wedding. Sarah had been staying over more frequently as we prepared for the big day. And that particular evening, she'd gone to bed early, claiming she had a headache. I was staying up late in the living room, working on my vows and trying to get them perfect. I wanted to tell Sarah exactly how much she meant to me, how she'd changed my life, how I couldn't imagine a future without her. Max was lying on his bed in the corner, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, and he kept lifting his head to look toward the bedroom where Sarah was sleeping. Around midnight, he got up and started pacing. Not his usual restless energy, but something more purposeful, more urgent. Then he did something he'd never done before in 8 years. He went to Sarah's purse, which she'd left on the kitchen counter, and started pawing at it. Not aggressively, but persistently, like he was trying to get my attention. Max had been trained since puppyhood never to touch other people's belongings. It was one of his most reliable behaviors. But here he was, completely ignoring his training. I whispered harshly at him to stop, worried he'd wake Sarah up. But every time I turned back to my laptop, he'd start again. Finally, I got up to physically move him away from the counter, and that's when I noticed something odd. Sarah's purse wasn't fully closed, and there was a faint blue light coming from inside it. I thought maybe her phone was getting notifications, but that didn't make sense. Sarah always put her phone on silent at night, and besides, I could see her regular iPhone charging on the nightstand in the bedroom. Curiosity got the better of me. I carefully opened the purse a little wider, and what I saw confused me completely. There was a second phone in there, an older model flip phone that looked like it hadn't been manufactured in years. It was the source of the blue light, indicating it had received a message. Why would Sarah have 2 phones? And why would she keep this one hidden while charging her regular phone so obviously in the bedroom? Max sat down right in front of me and gave me the most intense stare I'd ever seen from him. It was like he was saying, "Finally, you're paying attention to what I've been trying to tell you." But I was so conditioned to dismiss his instincts about Sarah that I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was an old work phone she'd forgotten to turn in. Maybe it belonged to a friend who'd asked her to hold on to it. Maybe it was a backup phone in case her main one broke. I closed the purse without looking at the message, went back to working on my vows, and never mentioned the incident to Sarah. I told myself I was respecting her privacy, but really, I think I was afraid of what I might discover if I asked too many questions. That night should have been my wake-up call, but I was so deep in wedding planning mode, so committed to the idea that I was about to marry my soulmate, that I pushed the whole thing out of my mind. I had no idea that Max's strange behavior that night was just a preview of what was coming. Because on our wedding day, Max would make one final, desperate attempt to save me from the biggest mistake of my life. And this time, he wouldn't take no for an answer. Our wedding day dawned absolutely perfect. Clear blue sky, gentle breeze, temperature in the mid-70s. Everything we'd hoped for when we'd booked the outdoor venue 6 months earlier. The location was a beautiful garden estate about an hour outside the city, with rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and a stone gazebo where we'd exchange vows. Sarah had insisted on this venue, saying she'd dreamed of a fairy tale wedding since she was a little girl. The morning started normally enough, though I noticed Max seemed more agitated than usual. He wouldn't eat his breakfast, kept pacing between rooms, and every time someone mentioned Sarah's name, which was constantly, since it was our wedding day, his ears would perk up and he'd start that low rumbling growl that had become so familiar over the past months. My best man, Derek, was supposed to be in charge of Max during the ceremony. The plan was to keep Max on a leash near the back of the seating area, where he could see me but wouldn't interfere with the proceedings. "Even your dog knows you're making a mistake," Derek joked as he clipped the leash to Max's collar. "Look at him. He looks like he's preparing for battle." We all laughed, but Derek's words turned out to be more prophetic than any of us realized. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock. By 3:30, all the guests had arrived and taken their seats. I was standing at the altar with the officiant, trying to calm my nerves and focus on the moment I'd been anticipating for months. The string quartet started playing, and everyone turned to watch for Sarah's entrance. Then I heard it, that unmistakable sound that had become the soundtrack of my relationship with Sarah. Max's growl, but amplified and more intense than I'd ever heard it before. I looked toward the back of the ceremony area and saw Derek struggling with Max's leash. Somehow, Max had gotten loose and was standing in the center aisle, every muscle in his body tense, staring directly at the entrance where Sarah would appear. The growling got louder, more urgent. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was almost like Max was trying to communicate something specific, something desperate. The wedding guests started murmuring, turning in their seats to see what was causing the disturbance. I felt my face burning with embarrassment. This was supposed to be the most perfect day of my life, and my dog was ruining it. Then the music changed to the bridal march, and Sarah appeared at the entrance to the aisle. She looked absolutely breathtaking. Her dress was a flowing white gown that seemed to float as she moved. Her hair was perfectly styled with small white flowers woven through it, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like something out of a fairy tale, exactly as she'd always dreamed. But the moment Sarah started walking down the aisle, Max's behavior escalated to something I'd never witnessed before. He wasn't just growling anymore. He was barking, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed off the stone gazebo and made several guests jump in their seats. He was straining against Derek so hard that I was afraid he might actually break free and run toward Sarah. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold, though I didn't understand its significance at the time. Sarah stopped walking. Not because she was startled by Max's barking. That would have been a normal reaction. She stopped and stared directly at Max with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It wasn't fear, surprise, or even annoyance. It was recognition. Like she knew exactly why Max was reacting this way, like she'd been expecting it. For just a split second, maybe 3 or 4 heartbeats, Sarah and Max stared at each other across that wedding aisle, and I swear I could feel some kind of communication passing between them. Then Sarah's expression changed back to her normal, sweet smile, and she continued walking toward me as if nothing had happened. Derek managed to get control of Max and quickly led him away from the ceremony area, apologizing profusely to the guests as they passed. Sarah reached the altar, took my hands in hers, and made a joke about how Max was just making sure she was good enough for me. Everyone laughed, the tension broke, and we continued with the ceremony. But I couldn't shake the image of that moment when Sarah and Max had locked eyes. There had been something there, some understanding that excluded me completely. It was like watching 2 people who shared a secret, except one of them was my dog, and the other was the woman I was about to promise to love for the rest of my life. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. We exchanged vows, rings, and our first kiss as husband and wife. The guests cheered, the photographer captured every moment, and everything proceeded exactly as we'd planned. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about Max's desperate barking and Sarah's strange reaction to it. During the reception, we decided to bring Max back out, thinking that maybe he'd calm down now that the ceremony was over. We were wrong. Every time Sarah approached the head table where Max was supposed to be resting, he'd start up again, not as intensely as during the ceremony, but enough that it was becoming disruptive to our guests. Finally, my brother suggested we keep Max inside the house for the rest of the evening. He's probably just overwhelmed by all the people and activity, he said, which seemed reasonable. Max had never been around this many strangers at once, and it was possible that the stress of the day was affecting his behavior. But as my brother led Max toward the house, I watched my dog turn back to look at me one more time. The expression in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. It was almost like disappointment, like he was giving up on trying to protect me because I'd refused to listen to his warnings. I spent our wedding night and the entire honeymoon convinced that once we got back home, I'd work with a professional animal behaviorist to help Max adjust to Sarah being part of our family permanently. I'd already researched trainers and planned to call them as soon as we returned. I had no idea that in just 3 days, Max would reveal a truth so horrifying and devastating that it would make me question everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the woman who was now legally my wife. Our honeymoon was a week in Maui, something Sarah had insisted on, saying she'd always dreamed of watching the sunrise from Haleakala Crater. It was expensive, more than I'd originally budgeted for the wedding, but Sarah had a way of making her dreams sound so romantic and important that I found myself saying yes to things I might normally have questioned. The trip itself was beautiful, but I found myself thinking about Max more than I expected. I'd arranged for my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, to check on him daily, but I kept wondering how he was handling our absence. Was he still agitated? Was he eating properly? I even called Mrs. Chun twice to check on him, which Sarah found amusing. "You're such a devoted dog dad," she said, curling up next to me on the beach. "It's one of the things I love about you, how much you care about the people and animals in your life." At the time, I thought it was sweet that she understood my bond with Max. Now I realized she was probably calculating how to use that bond against me. During the honeymoon, Sarah seemed different somehow, more relaxed, more confident. She'd always been poised and self-assured, but now there was something almost triumphant about her demeanor. She kept talking about our future, making plans for redecorating the house, discussing which of my friends she thought we should spend more time with, and which ones might be holding me back from my potential. She also brought up Max several times, always in the context of training and behavioral modification. "I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding," she'd say. "I really think we need to take a firm approach with Max when we get back. Maybe it's time to consider boarding him with a professional trainer for a few weeks, just to reset his behavior patterns." The idea made me uncomfortable, but Sarah had a way of presenting her suggestions as logical, carrying solutions to problems I hadn't even realized we had. "I know it's hard to think about being separated from him," she'd continue, "but it's really for his own good. He's clearly stressed by the changes in his routine, and professional training could help him adjust to our new family dynamic." We got back from our honeymoon on a Tuesday afternoon. I was exhausted from the travel, but excited to see Max again. The moment we walked through the front door, I called for him, expecting his usual enthusiastic greeting. The spinning in circles, the happy barking, the full-body wiggles that always made me laugh. Instead, Max appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room and just stood there, staring at us. Not at me, at us as a unit. His tail wasn't wagging, his ears were alert, and his expression was more serious than I'd ever seen it. It was like he was assessing a situation, trying to determine the level of threat we represented. "Hey, buddy," I said, dropping to one knee and patting my legs to encourage him to come over. "Did you miss me?" "I missed you too." Max looked at me for a moment, then shifted his gaze to Sarah, who was standing slightly behind me with our luggage. That's when his demeanor changed completely. The moment his eyes focused on Sarah, every muscle in his body went tense.